Recently, I've been receiving a lot of questions, mostly from students. Large language model going to replace humans? Mostly stems from two events. One of them is NVIDIA CEO saying that programming is going to become obsolete and human beings don't need to learn how to program and should leave it to computers.
I'm going to say something, and it's going to sound completely opposite of what people feel. Over the course of the last 10 years, 15 years, almost everybody who sits on the stage like this would tell you it is vital that your children learn computer science. Everybody should learn how to program. And in fact, it's almost exactly the opposite. It is our job to create computing technology such that nobody has to program.
So nobody has to program. And then some kind of system comes out, which is kind of a combination of tools that would communicate with each other, something similar to AutoGPT from the startup called Cognition, called Devon. And it performs of the issues resolved on this SWE bench dataset. And people say, well, it's 2 or 3 times better than the previous model, LLM Claude 2. Therefore, combining this with NVIDIA CEO's statement, programming is going to become obsolete. First, I would say this software does exactly what it says here, nothing more. It can solve SWE bench issues from GitHub with 14 almost % accuracy. So what does it mean? If you go to SWE benchmark, you see it's a data set of different problem statements from different GitHub repositories. Everything is in Python. It has the solution or the patch to the issue, a test for that patch, and 2 tests. One, pass to pass, which is tests that already run properly without any bugs in the code base, and they should run properly after the issue is resolved. And the fail to pass are a set of tests that right now don't run, but after your patch, they should run. So the goal of the large language model or the system is to create something similar to the patch that would solve the test patch. And Devon AI has 14% success in solving these problems. But let's look at the problems first. So one of them says wrong encoding occurs. It's for Japanese characters are multi-bytes, and they posted here the bug. Therefore, if you're a software engineer responsible for solving issues or debugging, basically, you create a patch, maybe with some documentation and explanation, run a test, mostly from the code that the person was trying to write, and the test should pass. So for these types of issues, something like Devon AI has 14% success. Well, is the claim true that AI has replaced software engineers? People cite tech layoffs from big corporations like Meta, Microsoft, across the world. Tens of thousands, in some cases hundreds of thousands, have been laid off. Now, are they replacing software engineers with Devon or something similar to Devon? Well, if they did, only to debug their code, it has 14% chance of success. So I think it's quite unlikely. Because if you compare it to a human, you expect them to have at least 90% plus success in solving GitHub issues, maybe even 100%. So it's not even comparable to actual humans. The other reason is the scope of this SWE benchmark. Even if Devon or its successor or a different company comes up with a method that could get 100% accuracy in solving the issues on this particular data set, it's just limited, 1, to this data set, 2, to the types of GitHub issues that we have here, which are basically debugging, adding a really small new feature. In terms of doing something way more complex, so let me get ChatGPT here. So let me ask it first, what is XTTS v2? This is a text-to-speech model by Kalki. So it says I don't have access to it. You can look at other LLMs which do have access to the internet, something like Find, and you can ask it what is XTTS v2. Software library, it needs more context. What is Kalki XTTS v2? Let's stop this. Okay, so it has access to the repo. It's telling me what this text-to-speech model is. Now, instead of asking it simple questions, here it gives you some syntax. First, let me ask a question similar to debugging. So I get this error. Let's give it like an import error and say TTS not found. It says Python cannot find the TTS module, therefore go pip show, pip install, and I think this chunk of code is wrong. You should say pip install TTS, not cocky TTS. But afterwards, it's gonna see which Python or Python 3 we're using and try to run a test. Again, I believe this part is incorrect. You should say TTS, not cocky TTS. But anyways, in general, it seems to be on the correct path for debugging our issue. But if you want to do something that requires an AI engineer, then we're out of luck. For instance, if I want to add a capability to cocky TTS and say replace the vocoder, so let's say replace the vocoder in cocky TTS from the current one, which is HiFiGAN, to Big vSAN from Sony. This requires a really sophisticated and complex set of steps, something that an AI engineer can do. It's no longer a debugging problem. Here it says download the big vocoder model, prepare it, and configure it. I don't know what the prepare means, but here it says change the JSON vocoder to the new vocoder path. Well, if you do this, because the big vSAN has a different architecture, it's gonna give me, let's say it's giving me an error saying that keys don't match. Let me help it out a bit and say dict models, dict keys don't match. It says there's a mismatch between the keys in the model configuration and the one in cocky TTS. It says update the model. Now, right now it's no longer correct, outputting the correct response here. So it says try to replace only the keys that exist, but the architecture is completely different in Big vSAN compared to HiFiGAN. So that's not even on the correct path. So to replace the vocoder in XTTS, you actually need to, yes, download the Big vSAN, but also customize it, change the architecture completely, add new layers to the beginning and the end to make sure it matches the custom HiFiGAN that XTTS version 2 uses. And then you would freeze the pre-trained weights. You will randomly initialize the new added layers, and you have to fine-tune it on a new data set to make sure the vocoder is now compatible with XTTS. I don't see in the foreseeable future any large language model or AI system like Devin being able to do that. So replacing AI engineers, I think, is out of question. Replacing software engineers, still out of question, because at this rate, only 14%, and on a debugging data set like SWE bench, it's not what software engineers do. It's part of what they do, but not the whole picture of what software engineers do. So how can we create a system? Can we create a system? First, we need a benchmark data set that would do complete tasks that a software engineer does. Create a whole new system, create a whole new database, create a website with a proper backend that will communicate with different parts and modules. We don't have a data set for that because there's no clear answer. It's really hard to evaluate. But if that becomes possible and Devin or any other system gets 90 plus accuracy on a proper benchmark data set that's going to replicate the task of a software engineer, only and only, yes, software engineers should be worried. People who are aspiring software engineers should probably choose a different career path. But the probability of that happening is the probability of LLMs replacing doctors or brain surgeons or politicians, which I think it's more likely than software engineers. So what the NVIDIA CEO tells me and what this chart tells me is basically AI is probably going to be an enabler of programmers. It's going to assist them in day-to-day lives, and I do not deny that. And debugging is extremely helpful. In writing boilerplate is extremely helpful. If you have a Copilot or the Hugging Face open source version of that in your VS Code, it's going to be extremely productive, especially if you want to write the piece of code yourself, add the boilerplate using AI, add documentation to your own code using AI, and not worry about the details. That's going to be extremely helpful. Just like proofreaders and editors in Microsoft Word were really helpful for writers when they wrote something and then came back and saw those squiggly red lines and corrected the errors, the mistakes, the grammatical problems. Same thing could be said about LLMs and coding. At the end of the day, NVIDIA CEO wants to sell chips and it wants to market itself as an innovator in the field, and it benefits them for now to position themselves as enablers of software engineering replacers. If you've been in the AI space long enough, around 2000, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, GPT-2 was announced by OpenAI, and their claim was, we're not going to release GPT-2 as open source, and we're not going to release the weights because GPT-2 is so strong and powerful, the whole fabric of society will be undermined. A few months later, some researchers took the architecture and trained it on an open source dataset and made GPT-2 public, and it turned out it could not even finish a sentence coherently without making grammatical or semantic mistakes. So these kind of PR moves are to be expected, nothing to really worry about. Now, the other question is, if AI is not replacing humans, why do we see tech layoffs everywhere? Why has the hiring rate and speed decreased so significantly? Well, it could be traced into two things. First, the macroeconomic landscape right now is not really strong. Interest rates across the world are really high. So the cost of investment in risky ventures like AI startups, small and medium-sized businesses to do R&D and extend themselves is really high. Bigger investors, they would rather put their money on risk-free, quote unquote, or less risky assets like treasury bonds and get 5-6% yield on their money instead of putting it in a tech startup that might fail with 90% chance. That's one of the reasons. Other macroeconomic reasons have led to this issue because at the end of the day, software development is creating a tech product which is inherently risky. So if you are in this business, you are in the risky business. Same thing with crypto developers. That's a risky business. In an economy which is shrinking or it's not really expanding and the interest rates are high, the job market for these types of risky employments will hurt. Similar thing happened in 2008 in the financial crash where a lot of people lost their jobs, lost their homes, became homeless, but that was only temporary. The economy bounced back eventually. And this is what I see. Also on the supply side, as this gentleman right here mentions, for the longest time, everybody was encouraged to become a software developer, data scientist. So the supply is also a bit inflated. So there's a huge bubble in the number of software developers, web developers, AI engineers that we have, and that also contributes to this problem. But again, in the long run, if you have a master's in AI or computer science, if you're planning to get a degree in computer science, that's what I think. I don't think it's permanent. I don't think AI is replacing humans. I think the probability of AI replacing programmers is the same as probability of AI robots replacing brain surgeons. It is possible, but I don't see it happening anytime soon. And whatever data set, whatever chart you get, try to think of what it represents. Just because one of these bars is significantly taller than the rest doesn't mean that we're all going to be doomed. Just read the number for not really significant. It is impressive, but it's not going to significantly affect the whole population of the world. And SWE benchmark, don't just take their word for it. It says only 25% subset. Don't just read the news headings. Go into the data set, see what the problem is. Another reason for this belief among my students, which are kind of beginning to learn Python, they might be intermediate level at Python, but they don't know much about data science and AI, is that they don't know what type of issues these issues are. So they think this is all a Python programmer does, fixes encodings in a software. An advanced programmer who knows AI, on the other hand, knows that these are really routine problems, and it is really nice to be able to fix them using AI, but it's not going to replace their jobs. Now, people who already know Python, they know that AI is not replacing them. People who want to learn Python, they think Python learning would be useless and it's going to be replaced by AI. So these types of people are kind of more vulnerable to these types of marketing tactics. And that's mainly why I made this video for these people.